The Wooden Truck by Dion Lyons. I find that being a grandfather has many special rewards that come with the job. Some of these rewards are priceless and to never be forgotten. This is a story of one of those rewards. Last year, I found myself at the Carroll Center for the Blind as part of my quest to regain as much of my life as possible. I did not like being blind, but I was blind nonetheless. One of my favorite classes was manual arts, or shop class as we called it. My instructor Bill and I seemed to hit it off from day one. He had a quick sense of humor and seemed to understand mine as well. During one of my first classes, Bill asked me what kind of project I would like to work on. I didn't have a clue. He told me about some of the projects that the other students were working on. The class was set up with every kind of woodworking tool under the sun. Wood lathes, miter saws, drill presses, and table saws were just some of the woodworking machines that were in the classroom. I was petrified of the machines and the tools. It all seemed impossible that I would ever get comfortable using them. I sat in my room one night and had no clue what to make. Jewelry boxes and spice racks were all fine and dandy, but I wanted something original. All of a sudden, a light bulb went off in my head. A rare treat for me in those last few months. I remembered that for Christmas, my grandson Jack wanted a toy truck that could be taken apart and put back together again. This swam around in my head all night. I think I even dreamt of a toy truck that night. I had shop class the next morning, and I entered the classroom whistling. Shop teacher Bill couldn't help notice my upbeat mood. "Mr. Lyons," he said as I entered the room, "are we in a good mood for a reason?" I proceeded to tell him about my idea of the toy truck. He paused after I finished, and then went to the other side of the classroom. He returned and placed something on the table in front of me. "Would this be the correct size of the frame, Mr. Lyons?" he said. I felt the piece of wood on the table in front of me and smiled and said, "Well, yes, I think this is perfect. You know, I've always wanted to turn this room into Santa's workshop. Now looks like the perfect time." I can imagine that my smile showed my joy and satisfaction. We decided on a dual-layered frame that would serve as a side running board of the truck, as well as supplying it with a more rigid core construction. Finally, I had a goal that made me feel very good. It felt wonderful to have his enthusiasm beside me as we embarked on the quest. Those next few weeks were some of the more pertinent learning ones that I have ever gone through in my life. With all of the other classes, such as orientation and mobility, Braille, fencing, communications, and personal management, adding into the mix with just trying to find out how to be blind in general, well, it was nerve-wracking at times. Mr. Bill showed me how to use a few of the machines. I managed to use a miter saw and still have all 8 of my fingers. I was nervous to get all of them out the first time I pulled down on that thing. To tell you the truth, I was a petrified wreck. After a few times down through the cut, it felt good to use it, and I think it helped my confidence greatly. I also learned how to use the drill press, the table saw, and measure with tactile rulers and other special instruments. It all seemed to me to be much more time-consuming than the old visual ways, but it was all I had to work with, and I needed to make the best of it. The fall was quickly strolling by as the weeks wound down to the end of my program. My drive and concentration to learn had impressed some of the staff and the other students. All I knew was that I needed to get the most out of this experience as I could. After all, I was staring at life being blind, and although I couldn't see it, I knew that it was staring right back at me. The last 2 weeks of classes seemed to be flying by, and my time of being able to work on the truck was nearing to an end. I still had a lot of work to do on it. Not being able to see what I was doing or what I was working on continued to wear on me. With a lot of help from the instructors, the other students, and with the grace of God, I managed to find my way to the pillow each night. Mr. Bill and I agreed that a peg and hole structure would probably suit a 5-year-old best. The structure would be easy to take apart and reassemble. The next week was a mad dash for the finish line. I ended up on the day before graduation with an unfinished truck, and it was breaking my heart. I had convinced myself that if I couldn't finish it at the center, there was just no way I could ever finish it back home on my own. No way imaginable. On that morning, I sat on the edge of my bed in my dorm, wondering how I was going to do this. My truck wasn't finished. As I sat, I prayed to God to guide me through the day and to give me strength to handle whatever He had in store for me. That morning, I spent most of the class in torment. I was trying to install the dowel housing for the wheel axles. This required drilling holes and then screwing and housing into the underside of the frame. There were 4 of them, and before I had finished, I had snapped, split, or totally destroyed a few more than 4. Bill kept placing new ones in front of me as soon as I started swearing. I think he had made a bushel of them ahead of time, anticipating the difficulty that lay ahead of me. Before the class ended, I had managed to install the 4 housings, even though I still had severely unfinished truck. It did not feel good. I heard the bell signaling the end of the class and almost started to cry. I frantically grabbed my bag and my cane and started heading out the door towards my next class. Bill asked me where in Sam Hill I thought I was going. I told him how much I appreciated his help with the truck, and he said, "But we're not finished yet." I asked him what he meant, and he told me that he had the afternoon off and wanted to know if I would meet him in class to try and finish the truck. I had almost kissed him. If I could have seen him to grab hold of him, I would have. The hop was back in my step, the whistle back in my tune. I had been told by some of the other students about their finished products, and they all seemed really happy and proud of their accomplishments. I wanted some of that. I wanted some of that feeling in the worst way. That afternoon, I arrived at the shop at just a little before 3. Other than breaking for supper from 5 to 5:20, we were in the classroom until 9 p.m. Bill stayed with me in the shop and helped me finish the truck that night. It was one of the best times I had ever had with anyone. After we finished the truck, all I could do was just hold it. I didn't want to let it go. It was perfect in every way, from the wooden tires to the wooden dowel axles to the peg and hole sideboards for the body and the cab. It was absolutely simply perfect, right down to the wooden engine block that was attached to the frame with 2 pegs. I wanted to sleep with it, eat with it, take a shower with it, and walk out into the sidewalk of Center Street and hold it up for all passers-by to see. It was part of me. It was a representation of the past 6 weeks. It was my first stab at full independence, and it felt wonderful. I shook Bill's hand and thanked him roughly 142 times before I left the shop and returned to the dorm for that night. That night I kept reaching out towards the desk to touch the truck. I had to keep reminding myself that it was actually there in my room, finished. It just didn't seem real. It just didn't seem possible that it was my room, completely finished. As I lay in bed, I realized that God had put the solution to my problem in front of me throughout the day. It was up to me, though, to do the work myself. I felt completely exhausted, but the electricity was still churning through my veins. I dreamed of wooden toy factories that night and of the head toy maker in charge. He looked dramatically similar to my shop teacher, even though I had no clue what Bill looked like. I could picture him in my mind and in my dream. The next morning was graduation day. I had finished the program without many hitches, aside from the truck and my mobility classes. My son Matt was making the 3.5-hour trip from Maine to pick me up. The trip home signified the start of the rest of my life. I had completed a very hard program and was returning home a winner. It was decided that Jack would not get his truck until Christmas. Those few weeks leading up to the holiday were very hard for me. Every time I saw him, I wanted to give him the truck in the worst way. I wanted to give it to him the first time I saw him. It was unbelievably hard to hold back my pride and joy from reaching its destination. Christmas Day came and Jack received the present that his Nuno made for him. His grandmother Nuna said that Jack could not take his eyes off it for a second as soon as he saw it. I showed him how to take it apart on the kitchen table, and within 10 minutes he had taken it apart and put it back together all by himself. I felt so good hearing him tear it down to the frame. He was as mesmerized by the truck as I was by the experience. That truly was one of the best memories I will ever have around the holidays. Later that spring, my wife and I went to visit Jack and his dad at their home. We arrived at breakfast on a perfect day. All the way through breakfast, Jack kept asking me if I wanted to go up to his room and play. I agreed. That was usually the best part of our visits. I loved lying on the floor and playing our favorites, which was usually army men and dinosaurs. That day was a little different. After breakfast, he grabbed my hand and led me upstairs to his room. Upon entering, I assumed the position on the floor as usual. He asked me what I wanted to play with. I told him it was up to him. He said trucks, and I agreed. I asked him what his favorite truck was. There was a long pause. I could hear something moving very slowly across the floor towards me. I felt a gentle nudge on my arm. I reached with my hand and felt what it was. It was his wooden truck that I had made for him. I could tell he was smiling, and I started to cry. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was, just very happy, and I was smiling way down deep inside. He told me he was happy too. It was a perfect moment on a perfect day, one that I will never forget, one that I will treasure forever, one that I hope he tells his own grandson one day as he hands him the little wooden